The cold rain hammered against Lily's threadbare coat as she stood at the grand iron gates, her two small boys clutching her worn dress. Through the downpour, she could see the mansion, lights glowing warm behind massive windows, a world away from her collapsing shack. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the words still burning in her ears. "A woman like you has no place asking for anything." She'd been turned away from every door in town, humiliated in front of her children, laughed at by people who once called themselves neighbors. But tonight, desperation drove her here, to the richest, coldest man in the county. What she didn't know was that this moment would shatter everything the town believed about beauty, worth, and redemption. The morning sun rose over the rural settlement, like a cruel reminder that another day had begun. Lily stood at her cracked kitchen window, watching dust particles dance in the pale light filtering through the gaps in the wooden boards. Her hands, rough and calloused from years of hard labor, gripped the edge of the sink, a rusted basin that barely held water anymore. The house groaned around her, its frame weakened by time and neglect, threatening to collapse with the next strong wind. Behind her, small footsteps pattered across the uneven floorboards. Michael appeared in the doorway, his 6-year-old face already too serious for his age. His brown eyes, so much like his father's, studied his mother with a concern that broke her heart daily. He wore the same patched shirt he'd worn for months, the fabric thin enough to see through in places. "Mama, is there breakfast?" His voice was soft, careful not to wake his younger brother. Lily turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just a little bread, sweetheart. But it's enough." It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But what else could she say to a child who'd already learned hunger as a constant companion? Before we continue with Lily's story, I need your help. If you're enjoying this journey, please subscribe to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, so we can keep bringing you powerful, emotional stories like this one. Your support means everything and helps us share more tales of hope and redemption. Noah stumbled into the kitchen moments later, his blonde curls sticking up in every direction, dirt still smudged on his cheek from yesterday's play. At 5 years old, he remained blissfully unaware of how desperate their situation had become. He smiled widely, showing the gap where his front tooth had fallen out last week. "Morning, Mama." His cheerful voice pierced the heaviness that always hung in the air. Lily knelt down, pulling both boys into her arms. She breathed in their scent, earth, childhood, innocence, and felt tears threatening. These were the moments that kept her going, when the weight of poverty and loss threatened to crush her completely. Her husband had died 2 years ago, leaving her with nothing but debts, 2 young sons and a house that was falling apart around them. The town had been sympathetic at first, bringing casseroles and condolences. But sympathy had an expiration date, especially for a woman with no money and no prospects. After breakfast, 3 small pieces of bread divided between them, Lily prepared to face the town. She stood before the clouded mirror in her bedroom, seeing what everyone else saw. A woman worn down by grief and exhaustion. Her dark hair, once her pride, now hung limp and tangled. She pulled it back hastily with a frayed ribbon, too tired to do more. Her dress, the only one without holes large enough to be improper, hung loose on her frame. She'd lost weight, unable to eat when her children went hungry. The walk into town was a gauntlet she'd grown to dread. The main street stretched before them, lined with well-maintained shops and homes that seemed to mock their poverty. Lily held Michael's hand while Noah skipped ahead, still innocent enough to greet strangers with a wave. The whispers started immediately. "That's her, the widow Wilson," a woman's voice carried from the general store porch. "Poor thing looks worse every time I see her," another responded, though her tone held no sympathy. "Well, if she took better care of herself—" Michael's hand tightened around Lily's. He was beginning to understand, to hear the cruelty hidden behind false concern. She squeezed back, a silent promise that everything would be okay, even when she wasn't sure it would be. Outside the bakery, a group of well-dressed women huddled together. Their clean clothes, styled hair, and judgmental eyes represented everything Lily had lost. As she approached, their conversation stopped abruptly. Then came the giggles, barely concealed behind manicured hands. "The ugliest woman in town," one muttered, just loud enough to ensure Lily heard. Those poor children. The words struck like physical blows, but Lily kept walking, her spine straight, despite wanting to crumble. Michael looked up at her, his young face twisted with confusion and anger. She shook her head slightly, a wordless plea for him to stay silent, to not make things worse. They continued through town, each interaction another small humiliation. The butcher's wife turned away when Lily tried to ask about work. The seamstress claimed she had no need for help, despite the help wanted sign still hanging in her window. Even the church secretary, who'd once called Lily a friend, suddenly found urgent business elsewhere when she approached. By afternoon, rejection had become routine. Lily's feet ached from walking, her pride shredded by countless dismissals. Noah had stopped skipping, sensing his mother's growing despair. Michael walked like a tiny soldier, protective and alert, watching everyone who came near them with suspicious eyes. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Lily led her boys toward the edge of town. Their small house waited, a skeleton of what a home should be. But as they passed the last row of buildings, she paused, looking toward the distant hills where the largest property in the county sprawled across the landscape. The Parker estate. Everyone knew the name, whispered with respect and fear. The man who owned it controlled half the county's farmland, employed dozens of workers, and ruled his domain with cold efficiency. He was wealthy beyond measure, powerful beyond challenge, and completely unreachable to people like her. Yet desperation made people brave or foolish. "Mama?" Michael tugged her hand. "Why are we stopping?" Lily stared at the distant mansion, barely visible in the fading light. Tomorrow, she would do what she'd been too proud, too afraid to do until now. She would go there. She would beg if necessary. Because pride was a luxury she could no longer afford, and her children's survival mattered more than anything else, even her dignity. What Lily didn't know was that the cold, distant man in that mansion had been waiting for this moment longer than she could imagine. Dawn arrived cold and unforgiving. Lily woke before sunrise, her body protesting every movement. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with plans and fears about what she needed to do. Today would be different, she told herself. Today she would find work no matter what it took. The boys still slept, curled together on the thin mattress they shared, their small bodies seeking warmth from each other. Lily watched them for a moment, memorizing their peaceful faces before the day's harsh realities intruded. Michael's arm draped protectively over Noah even in sleep, and the sight brought fresh tears to her eyes. He was too young to carry such burdens. She dressed in her cleanest clothes, though clean was relative when soap was a luxury. Her fingers worked through her hair, trying to tame the tangles into something presentable. The mirror showed a stranger, hollow-cheeked, hollow-eyed, a ghost of who she'd been. But she squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. Dignity might be all she had left. The Henderson farm sat just outside town, sprawling acres of corn and wheat that had flourished under old Mr. Henderson's care. His daughter Martha had taken over after his passing, and Lily remembered her as kind once, before widowhood had marked Lily as somehow contagious. She arrived at the farmhouse with both boys in tow, unable to leave them alone. The morning air smelled of hay and livestock, familiar scents from a life she'd once known when her husband was alive. Michael held her hand tightly, while Noah picked up interesting stones from the driveway, still innocent enough to find wonder in small things. Martha appeared on the porch, her apron crisp and white, her expression cooling the moment she recognized her visitor. Two other women stood behind her, the local gossips who seemed to materialize wherever judgment was needed. "Mrs. Wilson," Martha's voice carried no warmth. "What brings you here?" "I'm looking for work," Lily said, hating how her voice trembled slightly. "Any work. I can clean, cook, help with the animals. We're not hiring." Martha's interruption was swift and final. "Please, I'm a hard worker. I don't need much, I said we're not hiring." Martha crossed her arms. Behind her, the other women whispered, their eyes raking over Lily's worn appearance with undisguised disdain. One of them, Mrs. Peterson, stepped forward. Her expensive dress rustled with the movement, jewelry glinting at her throat. "Honestly, Mrs. Wilson, you should think about your children. dragging them around like this, making them watch you beg. It's shameful. The words hit like a slap. Lily felt Michael's hand tighten painfully around hers, sensed his small body tensing with anger he didn't know how to express. "My children are fed and loved," Lily said quietly, though her voice shook with suppressed emotion. "Barely," the third woman muttered, loud enough to be heard. "A woman who can't even make herself presentable has no business raising boys. They'll grow up thinking this is acceptable." Martha shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing in Lily's defense. The silence stretched, thick with contempt and judgment. Noah had stopped collecting stones, moving closer to his mother, sensing the hostility even if he didn't understand it. Lily turned away without another word, leading her children back down the long driveway. Behind them, laughter erupted, sharp, cruel sounds that followed them like thrown rocks. Michael looked up at her, his young face twisted with confusion and fury. "Mama, why are they so mean?" "Some people have forgotten kindness, sweetheart." It was all she could say without revealing how deeply the words had cut. The pattern repeated throughout the morning. At the Thompson ranch, the foreman took one look at her and waved her away before she could even speak. At the Miller household, Mrs. Miller opened the door, saw Lily, and closed it again without a word. At the boarding house, the owner actually laughed in her face. "How you think I'd let someone like you work here? You'd drive away every customer with that appearance." Each rejection carved deeper into Lily's spirit, but she kept moving forward. What choice did she have? Behind her, Michael had grown silent and watchful, his childhood innocence eroding with each cruel interaction. He'd started positioning himself slightly in front of his mother when people approached, a tiny shield against a world that had turned hostile. By noon, they'd tried 7 different places. Lily's feet throbbed, her stomach ached with hunger and stress, and her heart felt like it might shatter completely. They sat under an oak tree at the edge of the church property, sharing the last piece of bread she'd brought. It wasn't enough for 3 people, but she pretended she wasn't hungry, giving most of her portion to the boys. Noah ate quickly, but Michael studied his bread with serious eyes before looking at his mother. "I should eat more, Mama. You're getting too skinny." "I'm fine, baby. You're growing. You need it more." The church bells chimed, marking the hour, and several women emerged from a meeting inside. They spotted Lily beneath the tree, and their expressions shifted, some to pity, others to disgust, all to judgment. They gathered in a cluster, speaking in voices just loud enough to carry. "It's tragic, really, what she's become. If she'd just make an effort, clean herself up, fix that hair. A woman that ugly, inside and out, what can you expect? My husband says she's asking for charity everywhere. It's embarrassing for the whole town." Michael shot to his feet, his small fists clenched. "Don't talk about my mama like that." The women startled, then one laughed. "Oh, look at that. The little boy thinks he's a man." "Michael." Lily's voice was firm, pulling him back before he could say more. She stood, gathering Noah into her arms. "We're leaving." "But Mama, they—" "Now." She met the women's eyes for just a moment, letting them see the pain they'd caused before turning away. Her throat burned with unshed tears, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. As they walked away, one final comment drifted after them. "A woman like that should just hide herself away. She's doing those boys no favors, dragging them through her shame." That evening, as Lily tucked both boys into bed, Michael refused to let go of her hand. His eyes were too old, too knowing. "Mama, are we going to be okay?" She wanted to lie, to promise everything would work out, but Michael deserved honesty, even if it was painful. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise I'm trying. I'll never stop trying." Later, alone in the darkness of her own room, Lily made a decision. Tomorrow she would do the one thing she'd been too afraid to attempt. She would go to the Parker estate, face the cold, powerful man who owned it, and ask for mercy. It was her last option. And if he rejected her like everyone else, she didn't know what would come next. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of exhaustion and despair, a small voice whispered that perhaps this rejection had all been leading her somewhere specific. Perhaps every closed door had been guiding her toward the one door that was meant to open. She just didn't know that the man behind that door had been waiting for her to arrive for longer than she could possibly imagine. The iron gates of the Parker estate loomed before them, like the entrance to another world. Lily stood frozen at the threshold, her courage faltering as she took in the sheer magnitude of what lay beyond. A perfectly maintained gravel driveway curved through manicured lawns, leading to a mansion that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. Everything here spoke of wealth, power, and control, everything she lacked. Michael pressed against her side, his eyes wide as he stared at the grand house in the distance. Noah pointed at the horses grazing in distant paddocks, momentarily distracted from their desperate mission. Lily's hands trembled as she reached for the gate's call button, a small device that seemed impossibly modern compared to the rusted bell that hung at her own door. A crackling voice answered, "State your business." "I'm here to ask about work." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "My name is Lily Wilson." A long pause followed, during which she was certain they would be turned away before even entering. Then the gates began to swing open with a mechanical hum that made Noah gasp with wonder. No turning back now. The walk up that driveway felt eternal. Every step took them further from the world they knew and deeper into territory where they didn't belong. Lily noticed workers in the fields, their tools pausing mid-swing as they noticed the ragged woman and two small boys making their way toward the main house. She heard the whispers begin, carried on the morning breeze. "Is that the widow from town? What's she doing here? Someone's got nerve, I'll give her that." A man in work clothes approached them halfway up the drive, his expression stern. He was the foreman, Lily realized, the kind of man who made decisions about who belonged and who didn't. "You're here about work?" His eyes traveled from her worn dress to her scuffed shoes, making his own assessment. "Yes, sir. Anything available. I'm a hard worker, I promise." He shook his head slowly. "Mr. Parker don't usually hire." He paused, seeming to search for polite words. "He's very particular about his staff." "Please." The word escaped before she could stop it, raw and desperate. "I've tried everywhere else. My children need—" "Mama." Michael tugged her hand, his voice small. He'd spotted more workers gathering nearby, their stares making him uncomfortable. The foreman's expression softened slightly at the sight of the boys, but his answer remained firm. "Wait here, I'll see if anyone inside can talk to you, but don't get your hopes up." He walked toward the house, leaving them standing exposed on the driveway. The workers had abandoned any pretense of subtlety now, openly staring and whispering. Lily recognized a few faces from town, people who'd seen her rejected and humiliated over the past weeks. Now they watched her reaching even higher and failing even harder. "That's the one they call the ugliest woman in town," a voice carried clearly across the lawn. "Came all the way up here to embarrass herself some more. Mr. Parker eats people alive for less than showing up looking like that." Michael's face flushed red, and Lily felt him start to pull away, ready to defend her honor again. She held him firmly, shaking her head. Fighting wouldn't help them now. Nothing would help except a miracle she had no right to expect. The mansion's front door opened and several people emerged. House staff, Lily assumed, dressed in clean uniforms that looked impossibly pristine. They descended the steps with the foreman, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. Behind them, through the still open door, she caught a glimpse of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. A world so far removed from her reality, it might as well have been a dream. A woman who appeared to be the head housekeeper stepped forward. Her grey hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her posture radiating authority. "You're asking for work?" "Yes, ma'am. Any kind of work. I can clean, cook, help with laundry. We have a full staff." The woman's tone was clipped, professional, final. "Mr. Parker runs a tight operation. There are no positions available. If something opens up, it won't." The housekeeper's eyes softened almost imperceptibly as they landed on the boys. "I'm sorry, but you should go. This isn't the place for you." The rejection shouldn't have hurt more than all the others, but somehow it did. This had been her last hope, the final door she could knock on. Lily felt something inside her begin to crack, the careful control she'd maintained threatening to shatter completely. "I want to pause here to ask something important. If this story is touching your heart, if you're invested in Lily's journey, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're building a community of people who believe in hope, redemption, and the power of kindness. Your support helps us create more stories like this one. Thank you for being here. Noah had started to cry quietly, sensing his mother's despair, even if he didn't understand it. Michael stood rigid, his small jaw clenched, fighting tears of his own. Lily gathered them close, preparing to turn away, to make the long walk back down that driveway under all those judging eyes. Then a voice cut through the morning air, deep and commanding. "Wait!" Everyone froze. Lily looked up to see a man standing on the mansion's top step, silhouetted against the grand doorway. Even from a distance, his presence commanded attention. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in simple but expensive clothes. His face remained shadowed, unreadable, but authority radiated from him like heat. "Is that the woman who's been asking for work around town?" His voice carried easily across the space between them. The housekeeper stiffened. "Yes, Mr. Parker. I was just sending her away. We don't need—" "Bring her inside." The command was simple, absolute. All three of them. Shocked silence followed. The housekeeper's mouth opened and closed without sound. The foreman looked equally stunned. Around the grounds, workers had stopped even pretending to work, transfixed by this unprecedented development. "Sir, are you sure?" the housekeeper began. "Inside, now." Mr. Parker turned and disappeared into the house, leaving no room for argument. Lily stood paralyzed, unable to process what had just happened. The housekeeper recovered first, her professional mask slipping back into place despite obvious confusion. "Well, you heard him. Come along." The walk up those final steps felt surreal. Workers whispered furiously behind them, speculation running wild. What could the cold, untouchable Mr. Parker possibly want with the town's most pitied widow? As they crossed the threshold into marble-floored luxury, Lily held her son's hands tightly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Whatever came next, at least she'd made it through the door. And something about the way Mr. Parker had looked at her, even from a distance, hadn't held the judgment she'd grown so accustomed to seeing. It had held something else entirely, something that looked almost like recognition. The interior of the mansion was the assault on Lily's senses. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured rainbows across polished marble floors. Paintings in gilded frames lined walls papered in rich burgundy. The air itself smelled different here, clean, perfumed, untouched by the dust and decay that permeated her own home. Her worn shoes squeaked against the gleaming floor, each sound announcing how utterly she didn't belong. Michael and Noah pressed close to her sides, their eyes wide with wonder and fear. The housekeeper led them through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, past rooms glimpsed through open doorways, a library with floor-to-ceiling books, a dining room with a table that could seat 30, a parlor with furniture that probably cost more than Lily would earn in a lifetime. Staff members appeared in doorways, their whispers following the strange procession. Some looked curious, others scandalized. A young maid actually gasped when she saw them, covering her mouth with her hand. Lily felt her cheeks burn with shame, acutely aware of how she must look in this palace, a beggar tracking poverty through rooms built for royalty. They stopped before a set of heavy wooden doors. The housekeeper knocked once, received a muffled response, and pushed them open to reveal an office that took Lily's breath away. One entire wall consisted of windows overlooking the estate, offering a view of rolling hills and endless farmland. The opposite wall held shelves packed with ledgers and books. A massive desk dominated the center, its surface organized with military precision. Behind that desk sat Mr. Parker. Up close, Lily could finally see him clearly. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with dark hair touched with grey at the temples. His face was weathered from years of outdoor work, strong-featured and stern, but his eyes, sharp, intelligent, and impossibly blue, held something that made her catch her breath. They studied her with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in years. "Leave us," he said to the housekeeper, his voice quiet but absolute. "Sir, is that wise? Leave. Close the doors." The housekeeper retreated with obvious reluctance, and the doors clicked shut, sealing them inside. The silence that followed pressed down like a physical weight. Noah shifted nervously, making a small sound that seemed thunderous in the quiet. Michael stood like a statue, his hand gripping Lily's so tightly it hurt. Mr. Parker rose from his chair, moving around the desk with deliberate slowness. He was tall, imposing, and Lily found herself taking an involuntary step backward. He stopped, seeming to notice her fear, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You've been looking for work." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "And you've been turned away. Everywhere." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump forming in her throat. This was it, the final rejection, delivered in private so she wouldn't humiliate him by crying in front of his staff. "Do you know what they call you in town?" His tone remained neutral, impossible to read. Lily's hands trembled. Michael pressed closer against her. I've heard." "Tell me." The request felt cruel, forcing her to voice her own degradation. But what choice did she have? "They say I'm the ugliest woman in town." The words hung in the air between them, ugly and brutal in their honesty. Lily waited for agreement, for the polite dismissal, for anything except what happened next. Parker walked to the windows, his back to them, hands clasped behind him. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the room. "The ugliest woman in this town." He turned, and his eyes swept past Lily to some invisible audience beyond the walls. "Do you want to know what I think about that?" Lily couldn't respond. Her throat had closed completely, tears threatening to spill. "I think the ugliest woman in this town," he continued, his voice growing stronger, "is the one who never learned to see with her heart instead of her eyes." The words didn't make sense at first. Lily blinked, confused, waiting for the rest of the condemnation. Mr. Parker moved closer, and she saw something in his expression that looked like barely contained emotion. "The ugliest woman in this town is the one who looks at suffering and turns away, who sees hunger in children's eyes and offers only judgment, who mistakes poverty for unworthiness and exhaustion for ugliness." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "And your heart, Mrs. Wilson, your heart is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in this place." The room seemed to tilt. Lily's vision blurred as tears finally spilled over, streaming down her cheeks. She shook her head, unable to process what she was hearing. It had to be mockery, some cruel joke she didn't understand. "I don't—" Her voice broke. "I don't understand." "You will." He stepped back, giving her space, and his voice gentled. "But first, I need you to know something. Everything you've endured, every door slammed in your face, every cruel word whispered behind your back, none of it defines your worth, not to me." Michael, who'd been watching with fierce concentration, suddenly spoke up. "Are you going to help my mama?" Mr. Parker looked down at the boy and something crossed his face. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of courage. "Yes, I'm going to help your mama." "Why?" The question came from Lily, raw and desperate. "Why would you? You don't even know me." "That's where you're wrong." He moved back to his desk, gripping its edge. "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Wilson, and it's time this entire town learned what I already know." He walked to the doors and threw them open. Outside, the housekeeper stood with several other staff members who'd clearly been eavesdropping. Beyond them, through the mansion's windows, Lily could see workers gathering on the lawn, their attention focused on the main house. Word had spread fast. Mr. Parker's voice carried through the house and out to the assembled crowd. "Let me tell you all something about the woman you've been so quick to judge. About the woman this town decided was too ugly to deserve kindness." Lily felt panic rising. What was he doing? This would only make things worse, expose her to more ridicule on a grander scale. She moved to stop him, but he raised a hand, asking for trust she wasn't sure she could give. "This woman," he continued, his voice ringing with conviction, "has more beauty in her smallest gesture than most people possess in their entire lives, and I should know, because her beauty saved mine." Silence fell, absolute and shocked. The staff stared, mouths agape. Outside, workers had stopped moving entirely, and Lily stood frozen, her mind racing to understand what he meant, what he could possibly mean. Mr. Parker turned back to her, and in his eyes she saw gratitude, recognition, and something deeper, something that looked like it had been waiting a very long time to be expressed. "It's time everyone knew the truth," he said quietly, "about who you really are, and about what you did for me when you had every reason not to." Mr. Parker moved to the center of the room, his presence commanding every eye. Through the open doors, Lily could see the crowd growing, staff members flooding in from other parts of the mansion, field workers abandoning their posts to hear what was happening. News traveled fast on an estate this size, and apparently everyone sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding. "5 years ago," Mr. Parker began, his voice carrying clearly to every corner, "I wasn't the man you see today. I was nobody. A drifter with $50 to my name and a dream too big for my circumstances." The revelation sent whispers rippling through the crowd. The staff exchanged confused glances. They'd always known their employer as wealthy, established, untouchable. This origin story contradicted everything they'd assumed. "I was traveling through this region, looking for work, sleeping rough when I had to." His eyes found Lily's, holding her gaze as he spoke. "One night, during a storm worse than any I'd seen, I was on that old county road, the one that cuts through the woods near the abandoned mill. I'd been robbed earlier that day, beaten and left for dead. My shoulder was dislocated, ribs cracked, bleeding from a head wound I couldn't see to treat." Lily's breath caught. That road, that storm. A memory she'd buried under years of grief and struggle suddenly surfaced, sharp and clear. "I remember the rain," Mr. Parker continued, his voice dropping lower, more intimate despite the audience. "How it mixed with blood in my eyes, how cold I was. I'd accepted that I would die there. No one traveled that road, especially not in weather like that. I was alone." He paused, and in that silence Lily felt the pieces clicking into place, a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. "But then I heard something. A wagon, wheels struggling through mud." His gaze never left Lily's face, and a woman's voice calling out, asking if anyone needed help. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. She remembered. God help her, she remembered. It had been shortly after her husband's death, when she'd been returning from her mother-in-law's house with the boys, both of them babies then. The storm had been ferocious, but she'd heard something, a groan, a sound of human suffering that her heart couldn't ignore. She stopped her wagon, Mr. Parker said, his voice thick with emotion now. In the middle of a dangerous storm with 2 infant children in her care, she stopped. Most people would have kept going, would have told themselves it was too risky, too foolish, but not her. Michael tugged on Lily's sleeve, looking up at her with wide, understanding eyes. Even he could sense the magnitude of what was being revealed. Mr. Parker walked closer, and Lily saw his hands were shaking slightly. "She found me in the ditch, barely conscious, hypothermic, losing blood. And do you know what she did? She used her own shawl, probably the warmest thing she owned, to wrap my wounds. She shared the only food she had, bread meant for her babies, breaking it into pieces small enough for me to swallow." Tears streamed down Lily's face now, the memory flooding back with crystalline clarity. She'd been so scared that night, so alone in her new widowhood, but the sight of that injured man had overridden every other instinct. He'd looked at her with such desperate, grateful eyes. "She couldn't lift me into her wagon alone," Mr. Parker continued, addressing the crowd but speaking to her. "So she stayed with me in that ditch for hours, kept me warm with her own body heat, talked to me to keep me conscious, protected me from the worst of the storm with nothing but her presence and her will." The housekeeper had tears in her eyes now. Several of the maids were crying openly. Even the hardened field workers looked moved, their earlier mockery forgotten. When the storm finally broke, she flagged down the first person who came along and made them help get me to the nearest doctor. She stayed until she knew I would survive. And then... His voice cracked slightly. "Then she left before I could properly thank her, before I could even learn her name." Lily shook her head, finding her voice. "You were hurt. You needed help. Anyone would have... No. The word was firm, absolute. Anyone wouldn't have. Most people didn't. 3 wagons had passed me before yours stopped. I heard them. I called out. They kept going. He turned to address the assembled crowd fully. It took me 2 years to recover, to build myself up from nothing. But I never forgot her face. Never forgot what she did when she had every reason not to. She was a new widow with 2 babies and barely enough to feed them. Yet she gave me her food, her warmth, her time, her compassion. Mr. Parker moved to stand beside Lily, presenting her to the crowd like the treasure she was. When I came to this county and built this estate, I looked for her. I asked around, and when I finally learned who she was, what she'd become, how this town had treated her, I was ashamed. Ashamed that I hadn't found her sooner. Ashamed that while I'd built all this, she'd been struggling, suffering, rejected by people who had no idea of her true worth. He faced her directly now, his blue eyes intense with purpose. Mrs. Wilson, I'm offering you employment. A position in this household with fair wages, housing for you and your children, and education for your boys in the best schools this county has to offer. Lily couldn't speak. Her throat had closed completely, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. But more than that, Mr. Parker continued, I'm offering you dignity, respect, recognition of who you truly are, not the ugliest woman in town, but the most beautiful soul I've ever encountered. The silence that followed was profound. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone began to clap. Others joined, the sound building until the entire assembly was applauding, many crying, all of them witnessing a moment that would be talked about for generations. Michael looked up at his mother, his young face shining with pride and relief. Noah clapped his small hands together, not understanding everything but sensing the joy. And Lily finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, their nightmare was ending. But what she didn't know was that Mr. Parker's offer held more than just employment and housing. What she couldn't see yet was how deeply her simple act of kindness had changed not just one life, but the trajectory of an entire community. And what she couldn't imagine was that the man standing beside her had been planning this moment, waiting for her to come to him, ready to give her not just a job, but a home. 3 months had passed since that extraordinary day, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Lily stood in the cottage Mr. Parker had provided, a fully restored home on the estate's east side with 3 bedrooms, a working kitchen, and windows that actually kept out the cold. Morning sunlight streamed through clean glass, warming the wooden floors that no longer creaked with every step. She could hear Michael and Noah laughing outside, their voices bright and carefree in a way they'd never been before. She caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Her hair, now regularly washed and trimmed by the estate staff, fell in soft waves past her shoulders. Her face had filled out, the hollow desperation replaced by healthy color. She wore a simple but new dress provided as part of her employment that actually fit properly. But the biggest change wasn't visible. It was the light that had returned to her eyes, the hope that had replaced the crushing weight of despair. Her work on the estate was manageable and dignified. Mr. Parker had assigned her to oversee the household gardens and help coordinate meal planning, tasks that utilized her skills without overwhelming her. The other staff members, initially shocked by her elevation, had gradually warmed to her presence. Some had even apologized for their earlier judgments, shamefaced and sincere, but the transformation extended beyond just Lily and her family. Word of what had happened had spread through the town like wildfire, carried by workers who'd witnessed Mr. Parker's revelation. The story had been embellished and retold until it took on almost mythical proportions. The widow who'd saved a dying stranger, only to be rejected by an entire community, then vindicated by the man she'd rescued. The effect on the town's conscience was profound. People who'd whispered cruel things behind Lily's back now crossed the street to avoid facing her, their shame visible in hunched shoulders and averted eyes. Mrs. Peterson, who'd called her shameful, had sent a written apology that Lily kept in her drawer unread. Martha Henderson had come to the estate personally, tears streaming down her face, begging forgiveness that Lily had quietly granted. "Mama!" Noah burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Parker says we can see the new foals today." Michael followed more sedately, but his eyes shone with equal enthusiasm. Both boys had flourished in their new environment. They attended the county school now, arriving clean and well-fed. No longer the objects of pity, but of curiosity and even envy. Michael's protective edge had softened, allowing him to be the child he should have been all along. "Let me finish here, and we'll go together," Lily promised, watching Noah bounce with barely contained energy. The stables smelled of hay and leather, familiar scents that reminded Lily of simpler times. Parker stood in one of the stalls, examining a mare who'd given birth just days before. He looked up when they entered, and his stern expression softened immediately, something that happened more frequently now, Lily had noticed. "Right on time," he said, gesturing them closer. "Come meet the newest members of the estate." The foals were impossibly delicate, all legs and curiosity. Noah gasped with delight while Michael approached more carefully, extending a tentative hand to stroke velvet-soft noses. Mr. Parker explained their lineage, their potential, treating the boys' questions with the same seriousness he'd give adult inquiries. Lily watched the interaction with a fullness in her chest that felt almost painful. This man, this wealthy, powerful man who could have anyone working for him, had given them more than employment. He'd given them dignity, purpose, and something that felt dangerously close to family. Before we reach the end of Lily's story, I want to thank you for being here. If this journey has moved you, please subscribe to our channel and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that our worth isn't determined by the world's judgment, but by the truth in our hearts. Your support means we can keep telling these powerful stories. As the boys played with the foals under the watchful eye of a stable hand, Mr. Parker gestured for Lily to walk with him. They strolled through the estate grounds in comfortable silence, something that had developed between them over the past months, an ease born of mutual respect and shared understanding. "There's something I've wanted to tell you," he said finally, stopping near a grove of oak trees where wildflowers grew in abundant clusters. About that night, Lily waited, sensing the importance of what he was about to say. "When you stopped your wagon, when you climbed down into that ditch, I was conscious enough to see your face. And do you know what I saw?" He turned to face her directly. "Not pity, not disgust at my condition, just pure, uncomplicated compassion. You looked at me like I mattered, even though I was nobody, even though helping me cost you something. You were a human being in pain," Lily said softly. "Of course you mattered." "That's exactly it." His voice held wonder, as if she'd just proven his point. That instinct, that immediate recognition of shared humanity, it's the rarest thing in the world, rarer than all this. He gestured at the estate surrounding them. "I've met people with wealth, power, education, beauty by every conventional standard, but I've never met anyone with a heart as beautiful as yours." Lily felt tears pricking her eyes, but they were different from the tears she'd cried months ago. These were tears of healing, of recognition, of finally being seen. "The town has changed how they look at you," Mr. Parker continued, "but I want you to know. I saw your beauty from that very first night, when you were just a widowed mother with nothing to give except everything that mattered." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a frayed piece of fabric. Lily recognized it immediately. Her old shawl, the one she'd used to wrap his wounds, stained with old blood and dirt. "I've kept this for 5 years," he said quietly, "as a reminder that the most valuable things in life aren't purchased or possessed. They're given freely by people who understand what truly matters." The sun hung low in the sky now, painting everything golden. In the distance, Lily could hear her sons laughing, their joy echoing across the grounds. She thought of the woman she'd been just months ago, broken, desperate, convinced she had nothing left to offer the world. "Mr. Parker stepped closer, his voice dropping to something meant only for her. The beauty that the world despised, that cruel voices tried to diminish, it was never about appearance. It was about soul. And yours, Lily Wilson, is the most radiant I've ever known." He took her hand gently, his touch warm and solid. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not expecting anything. I just need you to know that you saved more than my life that night. You saved my faith in humanity. And everything I've built since, every decision I've made, has been with the memory of your kindness lighting the way." Lily looked up at him, seeing not the wealthy landowner or the powerful employer, but the broken man in the ditch who'd looked at her with desperate gratitude. And she understood finally that acts of kindness weren't measured by their cost, but by their courage, by the willingness to see suffering and refuse to look away. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for remembering." How could I forget? His smile was gentle, transforming his usually stern features. "The most beautiful person I've ever known?" As they walked back toward the cottage, the setting sun casting long shadows across the land, Lily realized that true beauty had never been what the world said it was. It wasn't perfect features or fashionable clothes or the approval of people who didn't matter. True beauty was the choice to be kind when kindness cost something, to be compassionate when indifference was easier, to see with the heart when eyes could only judge. The town had called her ugly because they'd looked with the wrong eyes, but one person, the only person who truly mattered, had seen her with perfect clarity from the very beginning. And in his recognition, she'd finally learned to recognize herself. True beauty was never meant to be seen by everyone, only by those whose hearts were open enough to receive it. Thrusty, did this story touch your heart? What part resonated most with you?